Time's 12:30, so let's begin here. So assignment number 3 is due on Wednesday at noon. Assignment number 4 is written, and I will post that probably sometime on Wednesday night. I just usually like to take a look at the previous assignments first before posting the next one. So we will spend some time during our next class talking about assignment number 4, and that will be over LyX and LaTeX stuff. Also, notice that fall break is next week, so school is not in session on Monday and Tuesday of next week, so we only have one class next week. Overall, regarding the midterm, all of you should have received your midterm back, and as I said in my listserv post, the grades were pretty good. I had some comments towards the end of this listserv that kind of described what I thought were maybe commonly missed problems among some students. I really don't have any additional comments other than this. Please make sure that you do take a look at the answer key. That I feel as though that the greatest amount of feedback that I can give you is to give you the actual answer key to the test. Obviously, after you take the test, not before you take the test. And so because of that, then I don't necessarily have a lot of comments usually in class regarding exams. Do you guys have any questions regarding the test? Okay. So I was curious, do students receive an email a few times a week from Nebraska Today, by chance? Does that sound familiar, which talks about news of what's happening on campus?
It's Sunday mornings.
Sunday mornings?
I always get a news update Sunday mornings
okay.
when I wake up from Nebraska.
Well, Nebraska Today is like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday publication.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
The reason why I bring that up, and I guess it's just maybe faculty and staff receive it, is because I will happen to be in Wednesday's Nebraska Today, and if you want to know a little bit more about my research, please take a look at that. Also, if you're wondering why I was walking around with someone in our department about a week or two ago, and he was carrying a camera and he was taking odd shots of me, it was because of this article here. So this is actually taken from the Stat Department library room or student conference room there. He actually hurt himself when he took this picture. He had to he was always standing on a chair, and he positioned the chair right in the doorway to the conference room. And so, of course, when he was up higher, he really hit his head really hard on that on the top of the doorway there. But anyway, I always find it interesting how these people in the media try to get natural pictures or natural videos of people doing their work or whatever. At least he didn't ask me to walk down the hall so he could record me walking down the hall and include that in the article. But anyway. Okay. So today we will continue talking about LyX. We are on page 8, number 8 in that set of notes. Okay. So we have this first document in LyX that we were looking at to look at some of the basics of how to use LyX. And again, this is what the document looks like there after it has been compiled to create a PDF. And now what we're going to talk about here is this section 3 here. So this is actually a cross-reference. We saw this before with the LaTeX document. And so if I click on this, it actually takes me to section 3. Well, we've seen how to set that up in LaTeX. How do we set it up in LyX? It's not too difficult. So in my LyX document here, the first thing that I need to do is create a label. And we've seen labels in LaTeX before. And the way that I do that is I can position my mouse before where section 3 starts or after. It doesn't matter. And I can just come up here to Insert, Label, and up will pop up a little box that suggests a name that I want to give for the label. I don't have to use it. I could remove that there and put some other name if I wanted to. Obviously, as you can see over here, if I click on this, this is the actual label that I had inserted in the document. And the nice thing about this is that you can change the name if you wanted to in the document by, again, just clicking on the label that is there. Now I need to cross-reference that label, and so if I come down here in my document, what I can do is come up to the corresponding icon which says Insert Cross-Reference. And notice it will have all my labels that I've inserted in my document already. There's only one. And so I can click on that. And then I have some options for the format of how I want this cross-reference done. So when you see the less than sign reference greater than sign, what that basically means is going to insert the corresponding actual number for that reference, section 3 in this particular case. Alternatively, I could put that number in parentheses. I could put instead the page number. I could say on page number, and so on. And so if I just click on OK, it inserts the cross-reference. Obviously, I already had a cross-reference in my document already. And I can always change it by just clicking on that cross-reference. So it's fairly simple. And again, what this cross-reference does is that if I were to insert a new section 3, so that section 3 now becomes section 4, then my reference, my cross-reference, will automatically update itself to section 4. Now to show you how LyX works, again, we can actually look at the code corresponding, the LaTeX code corresponding to this cross-reference. Does anyone remember how to actually look at the corresponding code? Okay, it's been a week, so I'm sure that's why you are not replying and you're not sure since it's been so long. So view source pane. And if I show the entire source here, you can see first of all, where is it? You can see where my, and I know this is small, but this is the best I can do. You can see where my label was inserted. And that's exactly this LaTeX code that we saw previously. And then here is my reference as well, my cross-reference. Again, the same exact LaTeX code that we saw before. Okay. Okay, so what about inserting tables? Really simple. Let me just go to a new place in my document here. Obviously, I already have a table, but I'm going to just hit enter here. And I can come up here to the corresponding table looking icon. Click on that, and then I can just decide, well, whatever table size that I want, as you might expect. So there is my table that has been inserted. If you notice that when I'm in the table structure itself, you can see at the bottom here I have some toolbars that pop up. These toolbars allow me to interact with the table. So for example, at the very bottom of the screen, I'm going to try to delete a column just to show you that it can be done, and there it goes. I can insert the column back as well. Now inside the table, if I right click, I can bring up some options such as more, and this gives me a lot of the same options that you see in that toolbar too, but in particular there's one called settings that I want to point out, which controls various settings corresponding to that table there, such as, do I want horizontal alignment, or do I want left alignment? Do I want center horizontal alignment? Do I want left? Do I want right? And so on. So you have a nice, lot of nice options there. I can control the borders of my table. Let's say if I just highlight some cells, I can come down here at the very bottom. Hopefully you can see that. I have, as you might expect, I can remove, let's say, maybe all the borders by just clicking on the corresponding icons. The default, let me change that back. One thing I don't like with the default inserting of a table in LyX is that notice you have the space between the first row and the second row. And if you just remove all the corresponding borders there, that will also remove that, that extra space in there. Now we saw in LaTeX how the preamble was very important. It controls some overall aspects of the actual document. You can access the preamble as well in LyX. And you can do that by selecting Document, Settings, and you have a whole bunch of settings here. One that I want to point out before we get to the preamble is the one that will come up by default, Document Class. Remember, to begin every LaTeX document, you have a line of code that specifies the document class. Notice what it says, Article, as what we saw before with this document. But we have this nice little drop-down menu here that allows you to access other document classes there. One thing that you'll notice, hopefully, well, you may or may not know this, but there's some publishers there. There's some professional societies there in terms of professional societies, their journals, what is their required document class that they would use. So, for example, the American Psychological Association. And so we'll just keep it as article, because that's fine. But there's some other ones here, like page margins. Like, at least for me, I always like to use 0.5 inches as my page margins all over a document. And so this is where you could go ahead and change that if you want, rather than using the default for the particular document class. And in this particular case, you can see how the default really puts a lot of extra space on the left and the right-hand side. So don't always go with the defaults. Finally, let's go to the preamble, as I mentioned. So this is where you can type the usual stuff that you would have in any preamble. So if you remember in the LaTeX document that we saw, we used the hyperref package. What that hyperref package gave us was it allowed for this red box to appear on the 3 so that if I click on it, it takes me up there. Do note, and I don't think I mentioned this before, that if I print this document off, this red rectangle around the 3 will not be printed. Also, what that hyperref package gives me is this nice little table of contents on the left side so that I can click on any part of it and get to that particular part of the document. And so, all I did was I took the exact same code that we had with LaTeX, put it in my preamble here. Now, an interesting note is that since a lot of people like to use the hyperref package, the makers of LyX have tried to make it a little bit easier rather than having to use the code there. They actually have, under PDF properties, do I want to use hyperref? And you can put some of those same options that we just saw right here if needed. Okay. Are there any questions? Yes.
So, is that where you can change your document class, like from article to book?
Yeah, you can change it. All you do is you just select, just select one of these there, whichever one you want. Let's see here. Okay, now let's talk about compiling a document. I think we talked about that a little bit last time, but we can go over it again. And right here you see these little eyes that corresponds to the view icon. So if I simply click on that, that will it will create all the LaTeX code, send it to MikTeX. MikTeX will compile it and then shoot back a PDF. And there's the PDF right there. That's it. Now, one thing that's different from using LyX versus LaTeX, and I don't think this made the notes, is that this PDF here is not saved automatically in the same folder where you have your LyX document. With LaTeX, that PDF would be saved in the same folder. Where this is actually saved is in a Windows temporary folder on your computer. And if by chance you ever wanted to know where it was, recently actually I had to figure this out. Under Tools Preferences, where is it? Paths. Yep. Paths. And if you come over here to temporary directory, I know that's small, but it's the best I can do. Temporary directory, this is a Windows temporary folder on my computer, and that's where the PDF is saved for LyX by default. In the end, it's not a big deal. If you want to save the PDF, all you have to do is go File, Save As, and that's it. Why do they do that? It's because you're just going to, I don't know, I think it just kind of cleans up your folder a little bit. So if you remember when we had, when we were compiling LaTeX documents, we had a whole bunch of other files inserted there, like the PDF, the log file, the auxiliary file, a whole bunch of files. And so instead, it just simply basically puts them all in this Windows temporary folder, and then when you exit LyX, it deletes it. So it just makes it clean. If you do want to see the log file, well, you could go to that folder, or you can just click on Document, LaTeX Log. And so if for some reason things aren't working out right, maybe you might be able to figure out what the problem is by looking at the LaTeX log, but again, let me warn you, it's not very user-friendly. Let's say that you actually want the LaTeX code itself. Rarely have I ever needed to do this. The few occasions all have been tied to particular journals that I'm trying to submit a paper to, where they've given me a document class or a style file that doesn't work as well as I would like with LyX, but this has happened very rarely. And so what I need to do is actually export out the LaTeX code and then just simply use LaTeX with it. So how do you get the LaTeX code? Simply File, Export, LaTeX Plain. That's it. Something I had never paid attention to when I was preparing for class, I noticed you can also export it as a Word file too. Do note that the conversion to the Word file is not perfect, but kind of I guess an okay option to have. Well, let's say that you have an actual LaTeX document itself. Perhaps you're working with someone else who has not been enlightened by the ability of using LyX rather than LaTeX directly, and so they give you a LaTeX file, and I've had this happen to me a number of times, and you want to now start using LyX with it. So you need to import it. You can do that as well. File, Import, LaTeX Plain. Do note that I actually tried with this particular document here, exporting out as a LaTeX file and then re-importing that LaTeX file back into LyX, and the conversion wasn't 100% perfect, but it was okay. I kind of liken it to how if you use one of those computer-based translators, like if you want to go from English to Spanish, you give it a phrase, and then if you use that exact translation in Spanish, go back to English, it doesn't come back exactly the way that you had originally had the English. I kind of think of this translator, if you want to say it, call it that, works in a similar manner, you could say. Okay, that takes us to page 14. Are there any questions? Okay, before we talk about these resources, I do want to bring up, and I think I might have done this before, but just for emphasis, excuse me. So on my website, all under section materials, all of my lecture notes have been done in LyX this semester. So you might remember at the beginning of the semester that I mentioned, well, I'm using a new way to type up my lecture notes. Well, this new way is I was using LyX. This is the first time I've used LyX to do lecture notes. And rather in the past, I've always used Word. And so some things are not necessarily organized as well as I would like yet in LyX. I'm just trying to find the best format. But I've posted some of my actual LyX lecture notes in addition to, obviously, all the PDFs on this web page. The reason why I do that is to give you some examples of how to use LyX. So for example, under LyX, you will see my lecture notes right here. LyX_intro. And this is what it looks like right there. So this is the actual lecture notes that we're looking at essentially right now. Now in these lecture notes, you will notice I have some LyX notes. These notes are there primarily just to remind me of something, maybe just give further information to myself, why I did something one way rather than the other. So they're there for my benefit. You're welcome to look at them. You will see at times I even give ideas of what would be maybe a potential homework problem or assignment problem that I could give students now or in the future. Of course, I don't put in the answers there though. But you're welcome to take a look at them. And so you can just see throughout, you know exactly how I'm using LyX to get these PDFs. I think it's kind of interesting to see. Now, right now there are some more advanced uses of LyX here that we will actually talk about in the next LyX example. So if you're wondering, for example, oh look, and he's done an image here or a graphic. We haven't talked about how to do that. Don't worry, we will. Okay. But anyway, I think these serve as nice examples. Now, let me go back there. Okay. Very frequently, you will see if I give a LyX file, you will see an images.zip file. The reason being is because all the graphics that I do have in my LyX file, they have to actually be external files. So unlike in Word where you can import a graphic and essentially that graphic becomes embedded inside that Word file, with LyX that doesn't happen. You basically have to do an external reference to it. So whenever I create a LyX document, you can see this in my folder here. Oops. So here, here is my actual LyX lecture notes file. I will always create a folder called images, and those are all the corresponding images that LyX file uses. And so what I've done, and you'll see how to insert all this into a document shortly. And so since there's so many images there, I always put them in a .zip file. Now also where this is going to be beneficial to you is when we do the SAS and the R stuff. Again, all my lecture notes were done using LyX. And so for upcoming projects, you will need to insert SAS code, SAS output into a LyX document. And my lecture notes give you essentially examples of how to do it and what it should look like. So for example, in my SAS section here, I only give you one LyX file, but I thought overall it was the best one overall that shows you how to properly insert SAS code and SAS output into a LyX file. Notice the corresponding images.zip file with that. Now for the R section, for all of them I give you the corresponding, for all of them I give the corresponding LyX file. Let me show you one. I think I forgot to open that back up. Fortunately, I had to restart my computer before class after I had everything opened up nicely on my computer. So this will be the regression section for when we do R. And some of the cool things about using LyX or even LaTeX when you're also using R is that you can embed the R code directly into your document. So right here is some R code. And then when I click on the view icon to compile it, to create the PDF, LyX goes to R, runs the code, and then shoots the code and output back to your PDF. So that not only are you compiling LaTeX code, you're also compiling, or you're running R code at the same time. And that's so important in the concept of reproducibility of research, although in this case, reproducibility of lecture notes. Because the code and the actual text document are all together. And there's going to be no mistakes in terms of like copying and pasting or anything like that. You know, the code and the document are together. These are called dynamically created documents. And this is to do this, I use a package in R called knitr. Knitr meaning you're knitting R code with LaTeX code, essentially. More on that later in the semester, but it's a really cool and very useful thing to do. I'll give you a recent example where this is used. Did anybody go to Trevor Heffley's seminar last Wednesday? Anybody? Okay. Well, anyway, he got a PhD in School of Natural Resources and in statistics, so it was a joint PhD. And and now he's a professor in the Department of Statistics at Kansas State. Just started this year after a postdoc. And so he's teaching a course similar to our Stat 870 course here, which is on regression. And he's actually requiring all his students basically to do this for all their homework assignments. So, and you'll see that in other departments of statistics as well. Okay. So back to page 14 now. LyX has a very nice website. There are tons of examples there of how to use LyX. I highly encourage you to take a look. Also, LyX has some good user manuals as well. You can access these user manuals by simply clicking on Help. These are all user manuals there. And the cool thing is, if I, let's say, click on the Math user manual, it comes up as a LyX file. So not only are you learning necessarily, okay, this is the command or this is how I do something in LyX, you actually see it done in LyX too. So it's not like you're looking at a PDF. If you want a PDF of this, all you have to do is compile it yourself. So when I first started learning how to do LyX back in 2010, what I did is I simply printed off pretty much all those user manuals, and I read them all. And that's what taught me how to use LyX properly. Because there was nobody else out there who really could tell me at the time. I encourage you to do something like that too. I think it could be very useful, but I think, you know, for regular day-to-day use, the stuff that I'm giving you here will likely be enough. And so LyX is widely used, so Google searches can be quite helpful too when you're struggling to figure out how to do something. But let me tell you, though, that most statisticians still don't know about LyX. I don't know why. I find this quite amazing. And they're left using LaTeX directly. Okay, so our second main LyX example that we're going to look at is dealing with a master and child document setup. This is commonly used when you have a large document. So many of you will go on for a PhD, and the largest document that you will then do is your dissertation. So what you will typically do is organize your document like this. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, and if you have a really mean advisor, you have a Chapter 4. And what you could do in a master-child format is create a separate LyX document for Chapter 1, a separate one for Chapter 2, a separate one for Chapter 3, and also for Chapter 4. And essentially link all those what are called child documents together into a master document. And we've talked about this a little bit with SAS programs too, where you have one main SAS program and you use like the include macro function to include other programs into it. Essentially, that's what this is now in a LyX context, where you have one master document in LyX, and you include child documents within inside of it. A very common format, again, whenever you're using a large document, even in Word, you can do exactly the same thing. That's what I did on my dissertation, for example. Okay. So, on my website, then, everything that I'm doing here is in this master.zip. So there's a number of images. There's, in this case, I only have one child document, and I have one master document. So it was just convenient to put everything together. There we go. So we'll talk about how to set up the master-child format in a little bit. I'm just going to go simply to the one child document that I have, and we're going to go through some stuff there before we get to the master-child setup. First of all, text styles. Text styles. You know, in Word, you know, you might you open up a Word document, you have hundreds of fonts to choose from. You have a variety of different other things that you can do for what the text actually looks like. Here you are limited in terms of what it does look like. You're limited by the document class. And so because of that, there are a limited number of text styles that you can correspondingly use. As I mentioned before, the default font that you will see with most document classes is what's called computer modern. So for example, this document here is done, and you can't see it very well, but trust me, is done in what's called computer modern. It's just a special font that it's actually set up to you know, make your text look nice, especially when you're dealing with mathematical characters. But this text here, you don't see the same font, though, in your LyX document. And so this is the default standard font right there. It's called Roman. And since you're using the default there, when LyX compiles this, it says, okay, I'm using the default. So it looks to the document class for how it's going to look like in the PDF. But this is the default. Let's say I want to change the word Roman to something else. So for example, I could come up here to text style, and I could change it to a different family. And you can see there's a limited number of families there. So if I choose typewriter and click on OK, you can see I have what looks like kind of like a courier font. I use this font, typewriter, throughout, or this style I should say, typewriter throughout whenever I have computer code. Because it's a standard format to always use, as I've mentioned before. A font that will produce characters that are exactly the same width. That helps you when you need to line up code, let's say if you're indenting some stuff. And so always, whenever you have some computer code, use the typewriter style. Let's come over here to family. Let's just explore a few things here. Under text style, I'm going to make that no change. Often it's nice to reset to get back to the default as well. And you have, you know, you can do some bolding. You can do some italicizing. You can do a bunch of stuff, as you might expect. You can change the size of the font. So this is something in Word that you have direct control over. There's a nice little drop-down box that says 12 or 10 or whatever. You can change it to whatever you want. Again, the size of the font is controlled here with respect to the document class. So the normal will be, well, whatever is the default for the document class. Usually it's like 10, 11, or 12. But maybe you want to go something bigger. So you can go larger or large, larger, largest, huge. And you can go in the other direction too in terms of making it smaller. And these these terms there mean something with respect to the actual document class. Do I know what a largest font size will be if I were to do this now with the article document class? No. How can I guess what it is? Well, change it to largest and then compile the document. And you can do it through experimentation. So you'll notice, for example, this is my LyX lecture notes here. See this begin huge, end huge? What I'm doing is actually beginning an environment with some LaTeX code, and I want to use a huge font. For some reason, when I was just trying to use this right here, the text style, it wasn't working for me. So I had to use some LaTeX code for that. Excuse me. How did I figure out what the LaTeX code was? I went to Google. You can also change the color of the font too, to whatever you want. Do note there is a small, well, let me explain this first. Now, this family here, suppose I want to change it to, I want to italicize it. Well, I can come up here to text style, shape, and do italic there. Alternatively, what I can do is that for a few commonly used text styles, there are nice little icons up here in the toolbar. So I can come over here to the emphasis, and now it's italicized. Excuse me. Now there's a small typo in the lecture notes. I forgot to put this right here. On the bottom of page 15, just interchange the two images. Okay, so next let's talk about equations in a little bit more detail than what we've done before. Equations can be a little tricky for beginning users to LyX. Let me get back to my document here. Okay, so you can see here in this document I have a Y bar. Let's go through step by step how this Y bar was created. First of all, I'm going to come up here to insert math. We've seen this before. And then I'm going to change it to what's the name? Rather than inline, I want it to be a display or offset type of equation here. Let's see, can we make this a little bit bigger for our purposes? Tools, preferences. Well, let's jack this up to 200%. Okay. So to do this Y bar, of course, as you might expect, I'm going to type Y. How do I get the bar on top of it? Well, I'm going to highlight it, come down here to the math toolbars that we've seen before, come to frame decorations, and you just look throughout. I know it's probably kind of small up there. Yes, it is. You find the one that has the little bar on top of it, and you just click on that. And hard to see, but yeah, it looks better up there. You can see that indeed I have a bar on top of it. That's no big deal. But when I'm in the equation itself, as you can see, I have these corners highlighted in kind of a pinkish color. Now, if I move back one space, or I hit the left arrow once, you don't see necessarily the cursor change position. But what you do see is that now I have little pink bars around the Y bar. Because that says, hey, I am now doing something that corresponds to this decoration, this bar here. And so that if I just started typing, you can see now that bar remains essentially on top of it all. Where instead, if I wasn't in that area and So I just did a one right arrow key there. Now if I start typing, that doesn't happen. So this is an example of something I briefly mentioned before called nesting. Parts of equations are nested within one another. And you have to pay attention to where those pink bars are to fully understand that, to understand where you're located. And that can be one of the frustrating aspects of it. So next I'm going to type an equal sign. And then to get a summation symbol, I come down here to the bottom where it says insert sum. Okay. Now I need to, on the bottom I want I equal 1, and on the top I want n with regards to that summation symbol. Here are two ways to do that. I can come over here to subscript. Now it's not necessarily the usual kind of subscript, like if you have an x and then you have a 1 right next to it, that's in a little bit lowered. But if I click on subscript there, notice where it took me. It took me to below the summation symbol. So I can type I equal 1. And then now to do the n over the summation symbol, I hit my right arrow key once to take me back up. And then I do the superscript, and I can get it like that. And again, right arrow once. Now I can start typing, the rest of my equation. Here's another way you could do this. Does anyone remember in LaTeX how to do a subscript in terms of just LaTeX code? Underscore. So if I hit an underscore, notice what happens. It takes me below that summation symbol. And then a superscript, caret. There you go. So now I can type the rest. I can type Y, and I usually just use the shortcut keyboard stroke. So I'm going to do an underscore. So it takes me down below. I hit the right arrow to come back up, /n. And there's my equation. If I wanted to instead, let's say I wanted a fraction. I wanted this, let's actually do that right there. Do note, sometimes it's hard to get the exact stuff highlighted in LyX when you're dealing with mathematical equations. Let's see if I did this right. So notice I have Y and I highlighted, and what I want to do is put that in the numerator of a fraction. So I come down here to fractions. I have a variety of things I can choose. I'm going to do a standard, and notice how it didn't work. It's often very hard to get exactly everything highlighted correctly. There we go. And now I can do an N down there. Okay.
So we use like shift and the arrows to highlight sections.
Yeah, I guess you can. I haven't tried that before. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, very good. I guess I hadn't done that. Is that just a standard word technique, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. If there's any other suggestions like that, please feel free to suggest them. It's interesting whenever you're learning, like especially what I found like software on your own, you miss little things like that at times, and just over time, eventually you accumulate those. But that's what can happen. Now let's say I want to number this equation. So I want to make sure that I'm actually in the equation itself. So I need to have those borders shown there, and I can right-click, number whole formula, number this line. In this case, will be exactly the same thing, and so I get a number there. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, sometimes maybe in the text you want to say, based upon equation 1, this is what we have, or something like that. But to fully reference it, instead of having to type actually parentheses 1 end parentheses yourself in the text, you need to set up a label and then cross-reference it. So I can again come here to insert label, and I can do my equation, and then to reference it, again, I come up to, where's it, cross-reference, there it is, and there you can see I have a variety of different labels already in my document, and I can click on OK, and now that will always be equation 1. Sometimes, especially when you're doing proofs, you have a multi-line equation. So how do you get a multi-line equation? Well, you don't want to have to simply have, an equation in one line, and then you go down to the next line, you insert another equation, and then go down to the next line and insert another equation. You don't want to do that. You'd like to be able to keep it all together in essentially one equation itself, but it just has multiple lines to it. So the quickest way to get to a multi-line equation format is to do Control Enter, and notice what happened. Let me do that again. Control Enter. You can see that now I have another line. And also what it did was it guesses, well, where do you want certain things to go in the first line? So essentially what this is a 2x3 matrix. And so it puts the equal in the middle cell. And so if I come down here, suppose I have equal, and let's say, I don't know, for some reason I wanted to pull out that n, and I can come here, oops, and there you go. So now you have this nice multi-line equation. Down below in the equation toolbar, you'll notice there's some icons about adding a row. There's some icons about that you can use to remove a row as well. You can have individual lines in your multi-line equation to be numbered, or you could just simply number the last one, depending upon what your interest is. Again, it's all you have to do is do this right-click there to number whole formula or number this line. Okay. Now, if you're to do a display equation like this, where this equation is on a line all it's on its own, let's say like in the middle of a paragraph, typically in Word what you would do is you hit Enter, and then you start typing the equation. Don't do that in LyX. Notice how I have my paragraph symbols, end of paragraph symbols on there. Did I talk about how to get those on last time? Let me just do it. Tools, Preferences, Display, Mark end of paragraphs. I strongly recommend that you do that, primarily for this equation aspect purpose. So let me go into my PDF here. So you want to not have an end of paragraph symbol there. We might be thinking, well, how do I get down to the next line? Well, again, this is part of learning LaTeX, where if I don't have an end of paragraph symbol there, all I do is I come up here to insert equation, and you say, oh, I'm in the same line. No, just come down here to set display mode, and I want to be a display equation. That's how you get to the next line. So you do not want to see something like this. Now you might be wondering why. It looks just about the same there. Yeah, but when you compile the document, here's what happens in those two particular cases. You have, and this isn't the best example, but I've seen a lot worse cases than this. You have a bunch extra space there between the text and where the equation starts. And in fact, what might actually happen is that the amount, and let's say you have some more text here, the amount of space between the text here and the text there is different, and that really looks odd. And trust me, through typing a 500 or so page book and not understanding this at first, I've had to actually go through the whole book to make sure that indeed I didn't actually hit enter at the end of every paragraph, or at the end of, or I guess before I display equation. And one way to think about why is because what you learned in like a math class, whenever you do a proof, you're basically you're doing it as a paragraph. So you might say one can show that. Well, you're still in the same sentence, so would you want to start a new paragraph then to get to the equation? No. One can show that, have an equation, and then continue talking in a paragraph form. That's the way to think about why you don't want to have an end of paragraph symbol before the equation. Okay, we are out of time. Are there any questions? Okay, and that's it for today. Unless you want to stay here, we can keep on going.